and in the course of trying to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president, to frame him for a non-existent crime of collusion.
You know, we just sued for the dossier or the underlying FISA documents today. So
have those ever been released in any previous case that you're aware of?
Sure, they've been released in the James Rosen case, where Mueller's FBI improperly targeted James Rosen, the Fox News correspondent.
Yes, and his parents.
Right, and then in the AP case. So there is precedent for the courts releasing this information. And of course, the agencies can declassify it and ask the court to declassify it. You know, and what's also troubling is we were lied to just this week, because we were told by the FBI and Department of Justice, and evidently the President of the United States was told, the sky would fall if this information was released. There was no classified information in there, and there were no names that were released that would harm the FBI or DOJ interests. These were high-level officials who ordinarily would have been subject to public disclosure in discussions of public documents like this. Why was the department? Why were they trying to railroad President Trump into keeping this document secret?
Because they were protecting themselves.
And then it comes out, and they're trying to say it's no big deal.
Right, or that you're unpatriotic for asking questions. So finally, Joe, this raises, I think, concerns for every American of all political postures about the behavior of the FBI. Are there any elected Democrats you know who are saying, you know, we should find out how our government is behaving?
No, and in fact, it's really quite sad. But it does now put the focus on Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein. I have a lot of confidence in Jeff Sessions ultimately doing the right thing. I have very little confidence in Rod Rosenstein, no confidence in Chris Wray. We need a federal grand jury to investigate what the Bureau and the Department of Justice under Obama did to do what happened in this case. There are serious crimes that were committed by government officials. There needs to be a federal grand jury, and it needs to happen now.
Thank you both very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Congressman Lee Zeldin is a Republican who represents the state of New York. He says he wants the memo supporting evidence released right away. Congressman, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you, Tucker.
So you say that the documents we were just talking about, for example, the evidence the FBI brought to the FISA court to justify spying on this American citizen, Carter Page, ought to be released to the public. What's the argument against that?
The argument against it would be that there could be some information over the course of the FISA application as you're reviewing all of the documents that will include sources and methods that may need to get redacted. In the effort to argue against providing any of the related material that was sourced, some might say that we shouldn't be releasing any of it. The counter-argument that I would provide, though, to that is that anything at all that can possibly be released to the American public, it's one thing when you read the majority memo that was released today. It's another thing when you get an opportunity to read the Schiff memo when that comes out. But when you actually are seeing the documents created by the Obama Justice Department and the Obama FBI, and you're seeing the FISA abuse and the misconduct at the highest levels of these agencies for yourself, and the documents are actually created by them, then the American public is able to form their own independent judgment on their own without having to rely on what might be filters of Adam Schiff through a third party in the media, you know, through a Twitter account, and then you're being educated on believing that, say, the memo that got released today was going to have all these sources and methods that shouldn't, or when Schiff was complaining that it was going to, you get the point. I mean, when he was talking about, those details, I mean, it's when reality comes out in the memos, you could see for yourself.
Well, and how about this?
Judgment.
So quickly, the thing that Democrats are pushing back against tonight is really the pivotal line in the memo that says Andrew McCabe, in behind closed doors testimony to the Intel Committee, said the memo was the basis, the dossier was the basis of the request for the before the FISA court. Can we get a copy of that part, the relevant part of his testimony?
Absolutely, and we should. The transcript should come out and people could see for themselves. And once again, Adam Schiff and the House Intel Democrats, they're just lying. As they said, they were complaining that Devin Nunes and the majority were making changes to the document, even though it was just grammatical changes, and those other substantive changes that were made were changes requested by the minority on the Intel Committee, as well as the most substantive change, which was done by the FBI.
Exactly. Congressman, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
The apparent ease with which the FBI was able to monitor Carter Page without his knowing it should have the rest of us asking, when is it acceptable to spy on U.S. citizens? Has the norm become that it's always acceptable for the U.S. government to spy on its own people? Glenn Greenwald writes for The Intercept. He spent a lot of time covering the American surveillance state, and he joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you, Tucker.
So I should, in the interest of honesty, note the obvious irony, which is the Republican Congress just reauthorized the law that made this possible in the first place and did so with very little public debate on the subject. And so that raises kind of a more basic question, which is, why is this question, when and how and for what reason the U.S. government spies on its own people, why is that so rarely debated in public?
It's a great question. I mean, it's the reason why Edward Snowden decided to risk going to prison, because he was so concerned that this huge, massive surveillance state was being constructed in secret, directed not just at foreign adversaries, but inward, domestically at the American people, without anybody knowing about it. And so he came forward because he was so concerned that Congress and the Senate never debated it, never discussed what the parameters are. And the irony is that we've had Democrats on the one hand spending the last year warning that Trump is this lawless tyrant endangering democracy. We've had the Republicans saying the deep state is endangering democracy by abusing its power, and yet Democrats, the leadership anyway, not the majority, got together with the Republican majority, including Devin Nunes, who authored the memo today, and just not more than 2 weeks ago voted to increase spying power and block all safeguards on how it's used. So it's really incredible now to watch this debate unfold.
Well, it's actually almost nauseating, and as I said, totally ironic. So you know a lot about how this works, what is legal and what is not legal. What does the U.S. government need to show to a judge or a series of judges in order to get permission to legally spy on a U.S. citizen?
So in order to target a U.S. citizen the way that they targeted Carter Page, which means essentially that they're going to listen to all of his phone calls, read his emails, monitor him digitally, they need to demonstrate to a FISA court, which is a court that meets in secret with just the Justice Department present, that there's probable cause to believe that he's an agent of either a foreign government or a terrorist organization. So they convinced a judge, obviously, a FISA court judge, that there's probable cause to believe that Carter Page is an agent of the Russian government.
How often are those requests turned down? Do we know?
Almost never. There's something like a 99.8% approval rate. The FISA court is a joke in terms of whether or not it provides real safeguards or oversight for how the NSA and the FBI can spy on American citizens. They basically rubber stamp whatever it is that's put in front of them. And so Democrats used to say that a lot. When George Bush and Dick Cheney got caught spying on Americans without going to the FISA court, the argument of the Bush administration was it's so burdensome, and Democrats said, well, it's so easy. They never turn you down. And now Democrats are trying to say, oh, it's a very rigorous process. It's not. They almost never, ever say no.
Yeah. Glenn Greenwald, who's been a brave voice from the left on this subject for many years. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Tucker.
So what exactly in this memo was so dangerous that you weren't supposed to see it? It would endanger this country for you to read it. We'll ask someone who's been making it.
The president wants it out, even though there are concerns that the work of tens of thousands of law enforcement and counterintelligence professionals may be smeared.
It's staggering to see how Republicans continue to put party over principle.
This is a tipping point for our democracy. Are we going to be a democracy after today, or is this going to be demagoguery and despotism?
Paul Ryan is now no longer on Team USA or on even Team Old Republican Party. He's on Team Nunes, which means he's on Team Trump, which means to some extent they're advancing in some sense the interests of Russia.
Ask questions and you're working for Putin. Well, there's particularly a meltdown over the release of the FBI memo by the hyenas in the press. Why is that? Why shouldn't we have been allowed to see it? What's wrong with a little transparency? Chris Hahn, a former aide to Senator Schumer and radio show host, joins us tonight. So, Chris, it's a super simple question. Why should I, as a taxpayer, a voter, an adult man, if Democrats had their way, I wouldn't have been allowed to see this. Why?
I think that the big problem with it wasn't just that they didn't want you to see the memo. They wanted
Well, they didn't
all.
want me to see it. Why didn't they want me to see it?
Well, they wanted to have some balance. They wanted to see the source documents released so that people could
No,
make
they
their own
didn't.
judgment.
That's
And they
not
wanted
true.
their memo released as well. Look, I've been reading this memo all day, Tucker.
You know,
I've
so
read-
wait, stop. They didn't want the source documents released. That's factually untrue. They could release them right now. For example, the testimony of Andrew McCabe before the Intel Committee is a source document. The request to the FISA court, those are source documents. Democrats don't want those released.
Of course they do.
Oh, really?
Of course they
Then
do.
why haven't they? Come on now.
I've talked to you about this last week. These are the exact things I said last week about this document. Let's see all the documents. Let's see the source document.
Well, then we're in agreement there, and I think that we will.
Yes.
And I'll be interesting to see who stands in the way of that.
Right.
But up until today, Democrats have stood in the way of releasing this. Now, if you think that there is libelous material in here, factually inaccurate material that libels somebody, tell me. If you think it imperils American national security, tell me how.
Right.
But in the absence of those two factors, I have a right to see it. Why would Democrats stand in the way of that right?
You know what? I've been reading this all day, and it kind of reminds me of when Geraldo Rivera opened Al Capone's vault. There was a lot of hype, and then there was nothing in it. I don't know.
Well, then why would Democrats who had, wait, hold on, then why would Democrats, if there's nothing in it, every Democrat in the House had a chance to read this, every single one.
Right.
Why would they, having read it, tell me that I'm not allowed to see it? I'm confused. You're making two arguments that contradict
Let me tell
one
you
another.
something. I'm watching this document now. I'm looking at this document now. They probably should have just said let it out because it proves nothing. It doesn't endanger the Russia probe. It actually shows that Papadopoulos was under surveillance for good reason. There's a lot of things in there that actually prove the case that a lot of Democrats have been making
I'm not
on the
here
Hill.
to rebut. Look, I'm not here to rebut the rationale for the Russia
Right.
probe. That may be another show. But this memo doesn't speak to those things. You're right. I said it at the outset.
Right.
What it speaks to is the surveillance of an American citizen called Carter Page, who graduated from the Naval Academy and has in the years since shown no evidence at all that he's working for the Russian government.
That's
and
not
yet
true. That's not true at all.
Okay,
Carter Page has been under surveillance by the FBI since 2013 when he was approached by the Russians, and he was told that he was being recruited by the Russians.
But
by
you're
the FBI.
you're missing this. Hold on.
Yeah.
There's no evidence. I'm not saying he wasn't surveilled. Indeed, he was surveilled. That's the point. There's no. In order to be surveilled, the Obama Justice Department had to make the case that he was a foreign agent. There's no evidence that he was a foreign agent. That is a slander against him. So where's the evidence that he was working for Russia, that he betrayed America?
Well,
that
this memo isn't concerned about evidence. This memo is concerned about Devin Nunes. Since 2013, the FBI has been warning Carter Page about Russians trying to recruit him. He continued down the same path.
But that doesn't mean that he. Oh, so he's guilty? Is that so? It's a really simple question. Do you think that Carter Page has betrayed his country by working for a hostile foreign nation? That's the claim the Obama Justice Department made to a FISA court 4 times.
I don't know.
I want to know, is it true or not?
I don't know if it's true or not, but when we see the underlying
kind of a heavy
source
charge
document,
to make against a man, don't you
when
think?
we see the source documents, we're going to find out what Carter Page was doing with the Russians and how that connected to the Trump
But why is he not
campaign.
in jail? Why does Carter Page stride a free man when he has betrayed his country? These are very heavy charges you guys are throwing around against someone who has not been indicted or convicted and against whom there is no publicly available evidence. And I don't understand why you continue to do that.
Why Carter Page is walking the street is a question that should keep a lot of Republicans up at night. Let's just leave it at that.
It's hard to believe you would say something like that on live television. Do you have evidence that he is working against America?
No, I have absolutely no evidence. But when a guy has been under surveillance by the FBI since 2013, and there were 4 FISA
Martin
renewals,
Luther King was under surveillance for more than a decade by the FBI. Does that mean he's guilty?
You cannot
what is
get
this?
a FISA renewal unless you show the judge you have evidence that the American citizen was involved with what you are claiming he was involved with.
But we know now, and it's indisputable, that at least part of that evidence, the lead of the FISA request, was the Trump dossier, which the FBI
That is not
itself...
what this memo even says. It does not say that.
It certainly does
and it surely
say that.
doesn't prove that. That's for sure.
Okay. I just want to restate one question to you.
Yeah.
Do you have evidence, any evidence, that Carter Page is guilty of the crimes you've charged him with on this show?
Absolutely
and the crime specifically,
not. I don't know if
then
he's
you probably shouldn't suggest he's guilty of
Well,
betraying his
I didn't say
country.
he was guilty. I think he might be talking to some people, and that's probably why he's still walking the streets.
Well, this is getting really heavy. Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank
I appreciate it. Could we rarely do, but we think it's worth it. We're still unraveling the contents of today's FBI memo. Some are already calling for even more documents to be released. Could declassifying this of justice in releasing this memo, the Nunes memo. If we release this, we're going to have to start telling the public a lot more about what we're doing, and we don't want to. Will they have to?
Well, that's what's most disturbing about this. Regardless of the content of the memo, you have this disconnect between what the FBI said, what Democratic members said about the release of this memo. Those of us who've been working in national security cases a long time expected there to be some type of footprint of sources and methods. There wasn't. This thing wasn't even remotely classified. And that really concerns a lot of us because it's the use of classification laws for tactical purposes. That if you look at what the FBI said, they said, we want this thing to remain classified because it's inaccurate due to omissions. Well, that's complaining about how the facts are being portrayed, not that they are classified. And many critics have said for years that the FBI and other agencies have been classifying material to avoid embarrassment. And this may be the most public and relatively rare example of that. There's nothing remotely in this memo that justifies the rhetoric used by Minority Leader Pelosi, Ranking Member Schiff. They all said that there would be dire consequences. And the FBI director and the FBI said that there would be grave, problems that would arise with the release. And then you look at the memo and it's sort of an empty grave.
So the Freedom of Information Act, as I understand it, says unless government has a compelling reason to keep something secret, it has to release everything unless it can show it shouldn't, because it belongs to the public. But it seems in Washington the instinct is the opposite. Everything is classified unless there's political pressure to declassify.
I think that's right. I think one thing that we should be able to agree on is take a look at this memo. Anyone looking at this memo can see that it was written to avoid sources and methods. It's basically what we had already heard, with the difference is that there was discussions of testimony and other details, but there's no disclosures of new sources. It was confirming that the dossier was a critical part, if not the determinative part, in securing that FISA order. So the question returns us to, why did all these members say that this would jeopardize national security? We can have disagreements about what to do with the FBI. We should not have disagreements about something like this. When you say that there's a national security risk about a document being released, and it is something of this kind that doesn't have any sources of methods or sensitive information, it's a problem, because that's lying to the American people.
No, that's exactly right. And we actually have a member of the Intel Committee on in a minute. I'm going to lead with that question right there. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Jonathan Turley. Just how big a scandal are the revelations we read today? One former FBI official thinks it's a profound problem for the country. He joins us next. Itself, it's almost like the allegations, which are that the U.S. government illegitimately spied on its own citizens, barely matter to them. They don't care about you or something. It's funny. Andrew Klavan is a contributing editor at City Journal. Terry Turchi is a former FBI Deputy Assistant Director for Counterterrorism, and they both join us tonight. Terry, first to you, since this pertains to the agency you spent so much time at. You're hearing people on other channels, there's almost a chorus of it, and it's becoming almost hysterical, I would say, that people who are interested in seeing this information or have questions about the FBI are unpatriotic, that they are insulting the men and women of the FBI. Do you think that?
No, I don't think that at all, Tucker. In fact, everything the FBI does should be out in the open, and we should be questioning it. And certainly we should be having questions about things like this. Nothing about any of these cases and what has been now confirmed in the memo have ever looked normal. And we have to ask ourselves, why were so many safeguards and guidelines and procedures that we always followed, never followed here? And I'll say one more thing to that. When I left the FBI and when I went into the FBI, we had a saying that you don't want to even just be concerned about propriety and the propriety of what you do. You also want to be equally concerned about the appearance of impropriety. Right. And in fact, I have a lot of friends and colleagues that got in a lot of trouble because of the appearance of impropriety. And this has that, at the very minimum, written all over it.
Yeah. And so you don't, just to make sure I'm absolutely clear on this, you don't feel diminished as a veteran of the FBI when people ask questions about its behavior?
Not at all. And in fact, I've talked to a lot of friends in the FBI and outside, and all of us are concerned about the irregularities of this and the top level of the FBI in the last few months.
Yeah, well, I can certainly see why. So, Mr. Klavan, what do you make of the press coverage of this? Do you think it has been designed to serve the public interest or something else?
Oh, I think it's a scandal within a scandal, and almost as bad as the scandal in the FBI. I mean, we just finished watching Spielberg's movie, The Post, about how brave the Washington Post was to defy the Nixon administration and bring out the Pentagon Papers despite their cries that it would hurt national security. Right. Now suddenly national security is sacrosanct and more important than information. I remember decades of the left squealing about J. Edgar Hoover and his unjustified wiretaps, and now suddenly we're told that unjustified wiretapping is a nothing burger. You know, the press has done nothing for this past year but whine about how Donald Trump has slapped them back and forth. But now, when it comes to releasing information, this is information that in no way damaged the public good, in no way damaged our national security. The press, the people who are supposed to speak truth to power and about power, are trying to cover it up and suppress it and spin it to make it less important. It's actually appalling, and it just brings that old Latin tag, you know, who will guard the guardians? If we've lost a press that really cares about the truth, if we've lost a press willing to hold any powerful person to high standards, then we've lost the people who are supposed to guard.
But how does a journalist, how does someone who calls himself a journalist, whose default position you would think would always be more information, as long as there's no grave downside, how does that person argue against showing the public things it's entitled to see?
It's amazing, and I really do think it is a holdover from the Obama administration, an administration that turned the federal government essentially into a Chicago-style machine full of cronies and corruption and outward malfeasance. I mean, malfeasance we could see, like the IRS scandal, while the press stood by, afraid, I think, to lay a finger on a president who they looked at as, you know, the first black president, certainly, and as the spokesman for their point of view, their ideological point of view, and they didn't want to touch him. And when you have no press, the government is going to get out of control, and the Obama administration did.
Very quickly, Ms. Churchy, do you think that it's in the FBI's interest to declassify what it can as it pertains to this investigation? You know, things that don't obviously jeopardize our national security, but to the extent it can, tell us more.
The natural tendency for me and any other FBI official would be to say no, but in this instance, the answer is definitely yes. This goes way beyond what the FBI does, what the case is about, or what this particular series of circumstances is about. This goes right to the idea of civil liberties and the balance that the FBI is responsible for ensuring between criminal investigations, national security, and civil liberties. And we messed up. And we just simply have to get this out. And the sooner we do, the sooner people see as much as they can see and as much as is safe to show them as from a national security perspective, the better off we'll all be. Because right now, as we've seen today, national security wasn't the argument for this.
No, they lied about that. Thank you both. That was really interesting. I appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, one congressman on the Intel Committee says the memos released today is an attack on the rule of law. Why exactly? He joins us next to explain.
That memo, he would not only be endangering our country, but he would also be violating the rules of the Congress of the United States.
The release of this memo is really reminiscent of the darkest days of the McCarthy era.
There is zero proof or even evidence that there is political bias in the FBI, but if you say it long enough and often enough, there will be people who have doubts about it, and it's a profoundly unpatriotic thing to do.
You're not patriotic if you want your questions answered. Democrats are lashing out. That's not even strong enough. Something profound is happening here. But they're very upset by the release of the FBI memo. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said President Trump, quote, just sent his friend Putin a bouquet. Many have said similar intemperate things, including Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, who joins us tonight. So, Congressman, many Democrats, including Democratic leaders, Pelosi and Schiff, to name two, said before this was released that its release would jeopardize American national security. That turned out to be a lie, provably, because there's nothing in this that was classified. In fact, there's no obvious reason it was classified in the first place. So why would they tell us that when they knew it wasn't true?
Good evening, Tucker. You should be concerned about this, too. It does reveal sources. You should read the memo. Just because you knew the sources beforehand because they were reported on doesn't mean we acknowledge them in ongoing investigations.
So please be precise about how please be precise about how it jeopardizes our national security, because a lot of us are concerned about doing that, and I would never want to play any role in doing that. And that's why it's such a serious charge, and that's why when you make it,
you're playing a role in doing that right now.
Well, tell me how.
You're playing a role Because we don't acknowledge sources in ongoing investigations.
What source
for
are you
FISA.
talking about, and how does that imperil our country?
Well, the memo goes into Papadopoulos and Page and others that you only knew about because they were reported on, not because they were
I knew about
but
because
I will say,
Papadopoulos was
Tucker,
indicted, and the memo came out today. So just explain to me how you just accused me of endangering American national security, and I think it's fair to ask you to be very precise in explaining how I'm doing that. So please do.
The larger danger that you're doing and
not the
others
larger
are doing
danger.
is
You just
the rule
accused
of
me.
law, Tucker.
Slow down.
You're
you just
using
accused
the police
I'm not
to
going
go
to let you go
after
on
your
this.
political enemies.
I'm not going to let you go.
Yeah.
You just
I
so
already went on
you got
it.
you got two choices. You can either apologize and take it back, or you can explain it. I think it's fair to ask you to explain what you meant when you said I was. How does that jeopardize our country's security?
Because we don't reveal the sources in ongoing investigations. Tucker, right now in every police station in America, let me finish. Let me finish, Tucker. In every police station in America, the police are interviewing a suspect, and you're suggesting that we should give the suspect the evidence before we ask them the questions.
Who's
but
the
this
suspect?
is about the rule of law. We're trampling over the rule of law in this country.
But what,
they gave the White House evidence in the Russia investigation. The White House are subjects of the Russian.
I'm talking about me. Hold on. I'm talking about me as an American citizen who got a chance to read this much talked about memo today, and I listened to people like you tell me, and now explicitly tell me that I'm hurting our country by reading it. And I want to know how I'm doing.
And you're also hurting our country by not acknowledging the rule of law has been run over. They're using the police to attack their enemies.
I'm sorry. One death penalty offense at a time here. One serious crime at a time. So I don't understand. You don't have an answer, which is why you're not answering my question. But I would suggest
gave you a bunch of answers,
not
Tucker.
making. No, I have literally no idea what you're talking about.
That's the problem.
Then why don't you try this one?
You don't like the answer.
We know from this that Carter Page 4 times was described by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, as an agent of a foreign power, Russia. 4 times. So the question to you is...
And in 2013 as well.
He was not accused of that in 2013. He was
surveilled. Actually, he acknowledged to our committee. You should read his testimony.
Unless you're revealing something that has not been revealed before.
But I'm revealing something you should have read, which was his testimony to our committee, where he acknowledged he was person A in the indictment in 2013, where he was suspected of being a Russian foreign agent.
Oh, but I don't think he was accused of it. Let me ask you this, though. Do you think he was? Do you think? Okay, fine. Do you think, since the DOJ accused him of that before a FISA court, do you believe it? Is he a foreign agent? Simple question. What do you think?
He was under suspicion. It's an ongoing investigation that's not closed. That's the problem, Tucker.
But
it's
do you
still
think
open,
he is? No, but do you think he's a foreign agent?
To comment on it, it's open. It's still an open investigation.
I think you're entitled to your opinion under the Constitution.
In real time.
If you're going to impugn the man's character, as you relentlessly have, suggesting that he's betraying his country, committing treason, I think it's fair to ask you, man to man, an honest question, a straightforward one with no innuendo. Do you think he's betraying his country?
I think you're not allowing the FBI to answer that question with what you and others are doing to undermine their work.
You've got to be kidding. All I want is for my questions to be answered. I sit here, an open, willing repository for all information, including your memo, including the documents that supported this memo, including the testimony before your committee.
So you support our memo coming out? I want to be clear.
Of course I do. Are you kidding?
Do you support our memo coming out?
Of course I do. Absolutely I do. I support
we should talk
all
about
information
it next week.
That gets to the truth.
Invite me back.
What I don't support
I'll be in Washington.
what I don't support is making reckless allegations about other Americans that you cannot support, as when you said I was harming our country's national security, and as when you suggested Carter Page was betraying this nation. And I want to know.
You're peddling a narrative that undermines the rule of law. I'm not peddling a narrative. I'm asking a question. You just said on my air, on my show, you're imperiling our national security. I said, oh, really, Congressman? How am I doing that? Am I going to be arrested for that? Because, I don't know, it seems like the kind of thing a man could be arrested for. Yeah, these are important times in our history. Either you are supporting those that are undermining the independence of the Department of Justice and the rule of law, or you're standing firm and saying this is wrong. Tucker, I wish you were on my side because I think you know better.
I'm not sure what the hell you're talking about. I only wish
I think
that
you don't
when
like what I'm talking about.
Well, I definitely don't like what you're talking about, but more profoundly, I don't understand it. And when you accuse someone of committing a crime for which people are arrested, why don't you game it out for me? Tell me one thing that I have said that you think makes all Americans, including my children, less safe.
You continue to support the idea that we should give suspects in criminal cases the evidence against them before we ask them any questions.
Well,
you also believe that there's nothing wrong.
I don't support that. I do think we should give them the benefit of the doubt, as the Constitution requires us to. Call me a liberal. When have I said that I think that we should give evidence to, I'm not even sure what that means. By the way, I think people charged in a criminal case have the right to the evidence against them, don't they?
Do you think?
Wait,
well,
so
not when they're being,
are you aware
not
of that?
when they're being questioned, Tucker. Yeah, Tucker, not when they're being questioned, not when they're under suspicion. Do you think it's a problem that the White House was sent evidence in the Russia investigation? Okay. Do you think it's a problem that they were sent evidence in the Russia investigation when they are subjects of the investigation? You don't see a conflict there?
What in the no?
Donald Trump and
maybe I would.
Don
but
McGahn.
in the case of today's memo, what specifically have I espoused that empowers threats to our country?
You're peddling the narrative that the Trump administration is putting out, which also is the Putin narrative, because they're retweeting this with their Russian bots. This, if you're on the same side as WikiLeaks and Putin,
I wonder, do you perceive
if you're on the same side as WikiLeaks and Putin, you should take a step back and wonder, whose bidding are you really doing?
I don't even know what to say. I don't want to explode on TV, so I'm just going to end this segment now. Let the record reflect
I'll see you next week.
Of working for a hostile foreign government. We'll be back soon.